Hello, my name's Daniel Mathers, and I love sheet music. In this video, I hope to explain how to read sheet music if you're just given a piece of sheet music and you have no understanding of music theory at all. Hopefully, by the end of this video, you should be able to just get a piece of sheet music and be able to, at the very least, understand where you should be looking on the page and how to go away and note bash your part. Finally, I'm going to explain everything else you can see on this page, all the little symbols around some of the notes and everything else that draws your eye to it. Starting with this symbol here, this MF. This MF stands for mezzo forte. It is a dynamic mark. A dynamic mark tells you how loud or soft that you're going to be playing the piece of music, or how loudly or softly you will be singing it. You will see here that it goes from MF to F via the use of this hairpin looking thing, which is called a crescendo. A crescendo is a symbol used when a dynamic is going to increase or get louder. So here, going from MF, mezzo forte, to F, forte, going from moderately loud to loud. Generally, the dynamic markings that you will need to know range from the quietest being 2 Ps, or pianissimo, meaning very soft, all the way through to 2 Fs, fortissimo, very loud. And all the ones in between, it goes from softest to loudest, goes pianissimo, to piano, to mezzo forte, to forte, to fortissimo. And just as a crescendo marking means that the dynamic slowly grows louder, there is the exact opposite thing called a diminuendo, which is the exact same thing but flipped around, so it goes gradually quieter, whether that be from forte to mezzo forte, or piano to pianissimo. Growing softer is indicated by a diminuendo mark. You may occasionally also come across a marking that has an S in front of it, that like this one, sforzando, which this means suddenly. The S stands for subito, which means suddenly, and then FZ means forzando, which means loud. So if you ever see a mark that is SFZ, then it means sforzando, suddenly loud. Above some bars of music, you may also find a little letter like this one here or this one here. These are chord symbols. So for people who are not as trained in reading sheet music, but still want to be able to follow along, this is a category that I fit into. I can't sight read sheet music and sight play it immediately, but I do know chords and I know how to play them. For example, I know how to play the chord C, which is above this bar, that you can see here. So if I were to play along with this, I would be able to see that it's, okay, it's C here, and then it's C for 2 bars, and then it goes to E minor 7, which I can work out is that chord there. So I could theoretically go to and follow along the music without actually having to know all of the notes and be able to perfectly read it. In some pieces of sheet music, more specifically standalone pieces that you might buy off the internet or piano vocal selections, you may also see that the chord symbol comes with a little diagram of a guitar fretboard. This is just another way of showing what the chord looks like for if you had someone who maybe wasn't so good at playing piano but was able to play guitar. So I would be able to look at that chord and be like, okay, it's a G, and then following what the symbol is on the chord sheet, I can play and play along that way. Quite often, the chord symbols on the guitar will be quite weird because they were not designed to be played on guitar and have instead been retrofitted, but more often than not, you will be able to play along with a piece of music using these chord symbols on guitar as well as piano. Next, there are a few symbols on this page that are attached to notes themselves that give the note different meanings. For example, we can see this first note here has a little hairpin, what looks like a little diminuendo mark. What it is, in fact, is an accent mark, which means this note you play slightly louder than the ones around it. You put emphasis onto that note. This note here, we can find out using the A, C, E, G. This top note is a C. I can also count the ledger lines and find out that it is a C below it as well. So it is those notes there. So for example, it would sound something like this, and I'm just going to be playing the top note. It would usually be doubled with an octave below it, but my keyboard bottoms out at a C, so I can't play any of the notes below it. But, for example, it would sound like this. There's emphasis on that first note because you see that little accent mark. The little dot that you can see underneath these notes here is called a staccato marking. And a staccato marking means that you play the note very short and detached. So instead of playing it, this is a C over an A. So instead of playing it 1, 2, 3, 4, instead of playing it like that, I would instead play it shorter and a little bit more detached. So the difference between those, once again, if I was to play it normally, if there was no staccato mark, against there being a staccato mark. So a staccato mark means you play it a little bit shorter and a little bit more detached. There is a symbol that means the opposite of staccato, and that is a tenuto marking. A tenuto marking is a little line underneath or above the note, like you can see in this piece of music here. You can see a few notes before it, we do have those staccato markings. The tenuto marking means that instead of playing it, short and detached, you play it just a little bit leaning into it. You let it stay a little bit longer than the note value. So where we were clipping it off before, it sounded like... If I were to play that with tenuto markings, it might sound like this. So you just leave it a little bit longer, let it hang around for a little bit longer, more attached. So there's 3 points on the spectrum between staccato and tenuto. Staccato, which is quite detached. You have just standard notes. And then you have tenuto, where you lean into the notes a little bit more. Another very important symbol to learn is this symbol here, these curved lines that connect these two series of notes. This is called a tie, and a tie is used when a note is held through a bar line. Taking this example into mind, this over the bar line, it means that we hold this note, which is a B flat, so this note here, we hold that for the length of these two notes. So we hold it for a quaver at the end of this first bar and a quaver for the beginning of the second bar. Together that would be a crotchet, but because we have to distinguish where the notes are over the bar line, they are used as two quaver notes with ties attached to them. Occasionally you might see what looks like a tie connecting two different notes, however, like we can see in this bar here. We can see the note C sharp with what looks like a tie connecting it to B. What that is actually a different thing called a slur. And a slur lets you know that you stay on the same word or the same musical sound whilst going to a different note. So for example, this one would be we know, and then we've also got the tie next to it. So if it looks like it's a tie, make sure that the notes on either side of the tie are the same, because if they're not, it may be a slur, in which case you are moving to a different note but staying on the same sound. Also on this piece of sheet music, we can see that there is a little number at the top of every bar. This is called the bar number, and is a very easy way to count where you are in the music. If, for example, you were practicing with a teacher or with another musician, and you wanted to start at a certain place, you might say to them, for example, oh, let's start from bar 19. You look through the music. Some music is helpful enough to have bar numbers at the beginning of every bar. Some just have bar numbers at the beginning of a system, and you have to count along from there. Some, very unfortunately, have no bar numbers. But in this piece of sheet music, we could just go, okay, bar 19, let's go. Let's look through it, and we can see it here at this bar. Bar 16 is the top of the page, then counting along, 17, 18, we find bar 19 there. Underneath it, we can see a different form of bar line called a double bar line, and a double bar line is quite often used to indicate different parts of the music. Going from verse 1 to verse 2, there might be a double bar line. It's very important to pay attention for these sorts of things so you know which part of the song you might be in. For example, in this song, we can see that there is a double bar at the end of bar 4, and then we, as the singer, would come in on bar 5. These first 4 bars are just the introduction to the song. Verse 1 begins at bar 5 after the first double bar line. In this piece of sheet music, Alexander Hamilton, we can see what looks to be a funky looking note head on the note B, which would be this note here. What the cross note head means is that this note is actually unpitched. So you don't have to sing, how does a bar sit? It is unpitched. The notes are there to tell you the musical timing of it, not to give you the pitch at which to sing at. You might find this where a word is spoken in the middle of a sentence rather than sung to give it dramatic impact. When looking at the same piece of sheet music, we can also see that in the right hand of the piano, there is a crossed note head. And thankfully, there is an instruction above that says snap both fingers. So this note is not a B being played on the piano, so it is not that. Instead, it is a snap of the fingers. This little note that you can see beforehand is called a grace note. In this instance, it's to symbolize that you are snapping both fingers, and when you snap both fingers, one is slightly before the other. If we were looking at this in a standard piece of music, for example this song here, we see that there is a little grace note on the C going into the B flat. This note is a grace note that doesn't have a musical time to it. So it doesn't have a time value like the other notes do. Instead, it is a scoop note. So what you're doing is you go to the C before dropping down to the B flat. And it would sound something like this. It's just the tiniest of notes, and it's something that humans do quite a lot when singing anyway. We will scoop down to notes. So if I would sing instead of happy birthday to you, I might go happy birthday, and that little ha is a grace note. It doesn't have a defined length, it's just a tiny little note to give a little bit of extra flavour to the note you're about to sing. And the final symbol that I'm going to explain is the fermata. The fermata can be seen held over some notes, and it looks like this. It's a little half circle with a dot in the middle. What a fermata is a pause in the music. It's where the notes being played or sung are held for an amount of time that does not matter on what the time signature is, or what the tempo is, or what the note values are. For example, in this piece of music here, we can see that in the left hand of the piano there is an E being held, and then there is a C sharp and an A. And that's held until the next bar comes in, which is generally a point where the pianist and performer will communicate with each other by some sort of nod, or in some pieces of music the chord is held so that the performer can come in at a point which suits them in the story that they're trying to tell. But most importantly to remember, a fermata is a pause, so where you'd hold a chord until you go back into tempo after the fermata. And so those are the fundamental concepts that you will need to understand to read most pieces of sheet music. This obviously isn't a comprehensive list. There are so many things in so many different pieces of sheet music that you will come across, but these concepts that I've taught you today hopefully will help you understand the majority of sheet music and will allow you to at least go away and be able to note bash it yourself. The best piece of advice that I can ever give you is if you're ever curious about anything that you see on a piece of music and you don't know what it is, the best thing is to just look it up on the internet. There are a bunch of great YouTube videos that explain all of these concepts in much greater detail. There's also great articles written. Wikipedia is a great source for you to look at in terms of just knowing about these certain things. But if you're ever curious about anything, just Google it and look it up. That is how I learned the majority of my music theory knowledge, is by seeing something, not knowing what it is, and looking it up. The same way that if I see a word that I don't know what it is, I look up what the definition of that is, and suddenly it's a new part of my vocabulary. Music is very similar to learning a new language, and once you have your head around the basic fundamental elements of sheet music, you will be able to read a whole bunch of it, and your life as a performer will be easier. Thank you for watching. My name's Daniel, and I hope this has been helpful. Cheers, guys!